I wanted to teach through Jonah. However, the problem was, the second I started it, I was like, well, we need some context to that. And every book I went back to, I was like, we need some context on that. The Bible's a big book. The minor prophets are kind of their own category. And before the minor prophets, it's fairly easy to keep up with what the Bible's talking about. And I'll just give you a quick overview of it. The beginning, Genesis 1 and Genesis 2, is pre-human history. That covers, I'm just going to go ahead and make everybody crazy from the beginning. I say that covers 7,000 years. Dr. Ruckman says it covers 2,000, which I don't think those numbers add up. The reason he does is because he said if they accepted Christ when he was on earth, then the timeline would have added up to make it the extra 2,000. I don't think so, and here's why. Deuteronomy 11, verse 21. Deuteronomy 11:21. He says, that your days may be multiplied, and the days of your children in the land which the Lord sware to your fathers to give them, as the days of heaven upon the earth. That is, there's a number of days that heaven has that will be the same as Israel will live on the earth. So we know how long they're going to be on the earth, 7,000 years. So the days of heaven must be the same. So I say Lucifer was here for 7,000. You can take that or leave it or ignore it altogether. That's fine. The first two chapters are pretty much simple. You can nail down that's God talking about creation and recreation. Then you've got the Genesis 3 to 10, that's the pre-flood era. And that covers from approximately 4,000 to 2,500. That's a huge time gap. We think about it, that's almost as long as from the days of when Christ was here to now. That's how long that little section of book or chapters is covering. Then you've got, of course, the issue with the Tower of Babel and the men multiplying, the language is being changed. That's going to cover about from 2,500 to 2,000. Now, of course, we're talking about BC, so we count backwards. The patriarchs, you know who those are. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, all of them. That's 2,000. Now we're chopping it down to about 500 years. Then you got the judges. The judges run you from 1,500 to 1,000. Those are pretty easy to keep up with. Because you know when you're talking about this judge, it's a person. There's a name there. You're basically just keeping up with that person. Then it starts getting complicated. We have the kingdom. Starts out simple. It's Saul and David and Solomon. Then the divided kingdom, and then it gets just crazy. Keeping up with who's what king in what area, and two of them have the same name, but they're in different kingdoms and all that stuff. That becomes difficult to keep up with. And during that time, the prophets, toward the end of that period, the prophets become prominent. And that's where these minor prophets come in. And they're prophesying that if people don't shape up, this is what's going to happen. And then, of course, the rest of the Old Testament, down to Malachi, is going to deal with the return to the land. And then there's, that finishes the Old Testament. But the part that's difficult is that kingdom era and the divided kingdom. And that's where these minor prophets fall in. So what is a prophet? That's a real good question. What's a prophet? And why do we care? These things are called minor prophets. And the big thing that everybody tells you is they're not minor because they're less important. They're minor because of the size. I don't say that. I say they're minor because that's the sound they make. It's sad. The whole thing. Genesis chapter 20, look at verse 3. Genesis 20, verse 3. This is a prophet you wouldn't naturally think of, but it is a prophet. Genesis 20, verse 3. But God came to Abimelech in a dream by night and said to him, behold, thou art but a dead man. He didn't say, I know the word art means not quite, but could be. But I take it to mean, in essence, he's a dead man. Just like God sees all humans as dead in trespasses and sin, While they might not have fallen over in a grave yet, they're dead in his eyes. Verse 7 talks about Abraham, restore the man his wife, for he is a prophet, and he shall pray for thee, and thou shalt live. Prophet's got some special power from God. And there he's saying, unless this prophet prays for him, the interceder, he won't live. So there's his life is bound up in the prophet. Now we understand that. Our prophet is Jesus Christ. And without him we don't have life. He is our life. But these prophets are going to come through. They are the life of Israel. When Israel heeds their warnings, they do well. When they don't, it's total devastation. Let's get into this. Now, to understand the minor prophets, you sort of have to understand the heathen. Most people don't talk about this. I think it's helpful to know, and so I'll tell them to you. This is Assyria. Shalmaneser III is from 585 BC to 824. During that time when he is running the show in Assyria, Assyria is still small. They're not a big empire. They're small. They cause little bits of robbing trouble here and there. You know, they run over and rob this people and run over and rob. They weren't big enough to be a real trouble. But Jehoshaphat in Judah is running the show. And he's a pretty good king, Jehoshaphat is. And even after, toward the end of his life, he still is fairly good. He had to get reprimanded a couple of times. His one bad move was he married his son to Ahab's daughter, from the north. Now, Ahab's daughter was no good. In Israel, of course, it's Ahab and the wicked woman, Jezebel. That Jezebel, repeat, she's so wicked, God refers to her all the way out in Revelation as being wicked, Jezebel. And there's the time frame. Ahab's going to die in battle with Ben-Hadad. Ben-Hadad is not in Assyria. He's in Syria. These names get tough to remember, I know, but it helps. I should have put maps up here. I didn't. Syria is right here, Damascus. Where is that? I can't reach it. It's right up here somewhere. Anyway, and Assyria would be over here. The Tigris and the Euphrates come through here. They're on the Tigris side. And then after him, his son is Ahaz. You remember he fell down through a lattice and he got sick, so he didn't last very long. Good thing, probably, because knowing his family, he wasn't very good. So he was injured, and at this time, there's a prophet in Israel, Elijah. And about the same time that this guy dies, right after that, Elijah leaves too. He's taken to heaven. So there's where you are chronologically. The books that deal with this are the book of Joel and the book of Obadiah. Those are the prophets that come in at this time and start telling what's going to happen and why they better shape up and how they better shape up. In the future, one of these days, we'll go verse by verse, but now you'll have in your mind where they fit. In the south, Judah, Joram and Athaliah. Remember, that's the daughter of Ahab. They're married because that was an alliance that Jehoshaphat, his father, set up to keep the nation secure. They have a son, and they're married in order to keep his throne, probably through the influence of Athaliah, his wife. He kills his 6 brothers, so there won't be any argument over who's got the throne. He's bad news. Now, that's a pagan thing. The pagans did that all the time. And so that's where all that mess is. And then, of course, Jerusalem is attacked by Edom, the Philistines, and the Arabs. All this stuff's coming in there. They just love to fight. It's every nation that can is coveting Israel, and they don't even know why. I mean, really, it doesn't make any sense. It's a little bitty slip of land, and really, I mean, now it's becoming where it can bear fruit, but for many years it didn't even have anything you could grow on it. All right, so let's see where we are now. Okay, Shalmaneser III. Ahaz in 841 comes to the throne. He's, of course, the son of Athaliah and Joram. He joins with Syria and Israel because there's bad news coming. Assyria has gained power, and Assyria decides they're going to take on Syria. Okay, that has nothing to do with Israel or Judah. But Israel and Judah figure, if Syria goes down, we're next. Therefore, we're going to go help them. And so they do. In the north, it's Joram who's king. And, of course, he's part of this coalition. And they go up there to help Syria. In the process, he gets wounded. And so he runs back home. And he's going to recover from his wounds there. He returns to Jezreel. While he's there, Ahaz from the south says, my good buddy over there is in the convalescent home, so let me go see him. So he does. He leaves, comes up there, and, says hi to him, whatever, brings him some flowers or something. At the same time, something else is going on. God has decided he's had it with Ahab's family and descendants. He anoints he has Elisha anoint Jehu to take care of business. And he's going to. Well, while the north and the south kings are together because the northern is in the hospital, Jehu shows up. And Jehu had orders, and the orders were very distinct. Kill Ahab and his whole seed. The whole family. Well, that was so fun for him. You know, guys back then loved to fight. And, it's like you can't put a governor on them. Once they get going, they're just slaying and slaughtering. Well, he oversteps his bounds, and he ends up killing both kings. That doesn't unite the north and the south. You'd think maybe it would. Maybe it'd put him on the throne, but it doesn't. God's not happy about this. All the way through the Bible, you start finding the blood of Jehu being referred to. And that's this right here, because he went beyond what he was supposed to do. God didn't want people killed just for the sake of blood being shed. And that's what he was doing. Shalmaneser III here in Judah. Well, let's start with Israel. In Israel, Jehu, of course, is sitting on the throne because he just killed the one who was on it. That's the way the kings usually took the throne. Usually you either inherited it, you were supposed to inherit it, but there was a quicker way than inheriting it. If you weren't in the family, or even if you were and you wanted the throne faster, just go kill him. That's what Jehu has just done. That wasn't enough. He goes out and he decides, my orders were to kill the whole seed. So he goes and he kills 70 sons of Ahab. Now just think about that for a minute. What man has 70 sons? Ahab. There's some hanky-panky going on here. Okay, so he kills all of them because God doesn't want them ever to sit on the throne again. Even though Jerusalem is the place that God considers the proper throne. He's still concerned about his people, which the Jews were up there in the north. Elisha delivers a reprimand to Jehu because he did more than he was supposed to do. We think, if I do more, I'll get an extra brownie point. But God doesn't tell us anything that's frivolous. When he tells you to do something, that's exactly what he wants done, no more, no less. And he's going to learn it the hard way. The reprimand is this. Because he killed the king of the south, his throne, he'll only have a dynasty to the 4th generation. That is, 3 children after him are the only ones that will inherit the throne. That tells you there's something bad going to happen to kill off so that he won't have any sons that'll sit on the throne. In the south, remember we've got Athaliah down there. It was her husband who was killed by Jehu. So Athaliah says, I'll take the throne. I've been running it anyway. Might as well sit on it. And she does. But to hold the throne, she's such a sweetie, she decides to kill all her grandkids so that none of them fight for her authority. Sweet people back then, wasn't it? So she does that. The Bible says she tried to kill all the seed royal, that is, anybody who could have a claim to the throne, royalty. Well, the high priest Jehoiada saves one son. He sneaks him away and hides him until he's about 8 years old. That's Joash, you'll remember him. That's in the south. Shalmaneser III is still running the show, and he's getting powerful. And he goes in, and he's if he doesn't destroy a town, he does it by fear. He puts them in fear that he will destroy the town, and then he can tax them. So they're paying tribute to him. Josiah in the south here. When he was a child of 8, or up to the 8 years old, he was being taught and instructed by the high priest. Jehoiada is the high priest's name. And so they come up with a plan. Obviously, the high priest is giving him Bible and Scripture. Well, that runs right contrary to Mama or Grandma Dearest. So they decide they're going to have a coup and they're going to kill her. And they do. They put her to death, and she should have been put to death. He was a good king. And at 8 years old, I don't know how many wise decisions you can make. Obviously, he's probably being counseled by some wise people, the high priest, one of them. And that was great as long as the high priest was alive. When he died, things went downhill. One of his bad moves was he did this. He decided, I'm not really ready for a big war. And so he bribed Syria. Syria was kind of the buffer ground for Israel, because if they're going to come in, they're going to come in from the north. Well, Syria is the first spot they hit. So they're buffered there. If they're on good relations with the north, then they're okay. In the south, with Judah, it's a little different. Judah, the buffer, is Ephraim, which they're not liking Ephraim. But he's eventually assassinated. This is just the story it goes. Now, I've been through the kings. Matter of fact, I got a whole book on the kings. The problem with the kings is this: you forget them so quick. There's so many different ones, and they do so many different things. This time through it, I said, you know, I for some reason was under the impression that the kings in the south were basically good. No, they weren't. They were all wicked. No wonder we needed some prophets to tell them what was going on. Okay, however you say that. Shimshai-Adai, the fifth. That's who's running the show in Assyria. And he had to run back home. He had to interrupt his killing people fest and go back home because there was a civil war going on. There was unrest in his hometown. So he goes back home. That's good because that gives a little rest to the other nations that, you know, they don't have to worry about him knocking on their door. Joash, of course, is in the south. In the north, we've got Jehu. Jehu dies. His son takes the throne. But that's okay because we've got until 3 generations. Jehoahaz comes to the throne. He doesn't really give us a whole bunch of details on his life. One thing we do know about him from the Bible is he says he has constant war with Syria. So that's just the way it is. The problem with this constant war thing is this. God had promised them that if they would obey his rules and follow him, one man would put 10 men to flight, and 10 would put 100 to flight. Well, they shouldn't have to be having these constant wars. Had they just followed God, one war would have been enough, and then they would have been more powerful and scary than Assyria. But they weren't. Of course, we had Josiah. After him comes Amaziah. What he does is he defeats Edom. That was a great thing. Edom's always been a problem in the south. And he defeats them, but then he ended up losing a war with Joash in the north. Assyria did this thing. They realized that fear began to work in their favor. So what they did was they started inventing ways to be cruel. And you'll find it in the Minor Prophets. He talks about them coming and taking you away with fish hooks. And that's what they did. They'd stick fish hooks in your mouth and drag you behind the horse when they came in. And lots of other stuff. I don't want to get into all the gory details. But they were doing that on purpose. The more base they could become, the more fear they instilled in people. And these are a lot of the places that he's come through. And most of these don't fall because they... oh, I'm getting text, all right. Most of these don't fall because they fell in battle. Most of them fall because they would rather pay tribute than fight a war. So we've got the war with Syria, and then Elisha dies eventually. There's no connection with the war in Syria, but the same time frame. Then after him comes another son of Jehu. See, I'm losing the names already. The last son of Jehu is Jeroboam the second. Now, you need to remember this one. If you forget the rest of them, remember this one. Jeroboam the second. He came to the throne, and he was great as far as a diplomat. He had good relations with the neighbors, and he made Israel great again. They became prosperous and relative peace during his time. But that's not good enough. The prophets come to town and tell him peace is not the answer. We'll go to Israel first, Jeroboam the second. In his days there's prosperity and peace. Well, up show two books you'll know, Amos and Hosea. At the same time, this is where Jonah comes in, probably. Nobody knows these things for sure. The growth of this great empire, Assyria, has amassed such a power that they're on the verge of becoming what Rome became. They're about to become the only world ruler because they're taking up such a swath of property and people in tribute to them. Well, it's no wonder Elisha, when Jonah gets the message, go to Nineveh, that's Assyria, and tell them, I'm going to destroy them, he balks at it. Because, if I could just delay long enough, God will wipe out our enemy. I mean, wouldn't that be good? So that's where he is. In the south, it's Amaziah. What happens, and I don't want to go much farther than that because then it'll start to get complicated, and I want to keep them simple. But what will happen is you'll see that nowhere in the annals of Assyrian history do we have anybody saying, Jonah came to town and we started doing right. That would reflect bad on them. That a foreigner came in and told them off, and they heeded the warning. So you have to read between the lines, and what we're going to find is for 3 kings in Assyria, after Assyria has amassed this great power, all of a sudden they become weak. They don't dominate anymore under 3 kings. The only reason for that, if you read your Bible and believe it, is because God has put a stop to it. And I think that's Jonah. When Jonah comes in and preaches, we know the whole Nineveh repented, even the animals. He said, put sackcloth and ashes on them. And so they repented there, and because of that, it gave Israel a reprieve for about 40 years, 35 to 40 years, where Assyria was not going after them. Soon Assyria is going, I'm not going to try to get ahead of myself, but soon Assyria will revert back to their old ways. And when they do, it's bad news. That was the space of time to repent God was giving Israel. 40 years. During that time period, they had wealth. They had peace. They should have been ripe for getting right with God because he had done them so well, but they didn't. And then we'll see the demise of the north and then the south, and then I'll show you the kings and the books that apply to it. And eventually I'll be able to get you to Jonah. The reason I want to do Jonah is this. Jonah is a prophet. Well, think about the book of Jonah. What does that mean? What's he prophesying? Most people would say pretty quickly that the prophecy that he's giving is the prophecy of Jesus Christ, because Jesus himself says it. As Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the bellies of the whale, so shall the Son of Man be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. Okay, so you know that. But I say there's a much bigger prophecy in the book that people don't talk about, and that's the second advent. It's in there. And we'll cover all the details of that if we can ever get there. But I just wanted to give you a little intro to it, and then we'll probably do one more overview of it and then get into verse by verse.